6 a.m., diesel engine running, Karen storming across wet grass in fuzzy slippers, already dialing 911. My coffee's still hot, and somehow I'm already the neighborhood villain. The audacity hit me like a slap to the face. This woman was calling the cops on me for working on my grandfather's truck in my own driveway. Karen Whitfield, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator, stood there in her pink bathrobe pointing at me like I'd committed murder instead of turning a wrench. "This noise ordinance violation ends now," she screamed into her phone, her voice shrill enough to wake the dead. I straightened up slowly, wiping greasy hands on my jeans, and couldn't help but smile. These entitled HOA tyrants had no idea who they were messing with. What Karen didn't know, what she'd never bothered to check, is that my family owned this land 30 years before her precious subdivision existed. Officer Martinez arrived 10 minutes later, ran the property records, and his confused expression told me everything I needed to know. Karen was about to learn the difference between HOA authority and actual ownership. What would you do if someone called the cops on you in your own driveway? Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Because you're about to see the most satisfying HOA takedown ever. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. My name's Jake Morrison, and 6 months ago I inherited my grandfather's old farmhouse, all 2.3 acres of it, sitting right in the middle of what's now called Meadowbrook Estates. Grandpa bought this land back in 1962, when it was nothing but cornfields and cow pastures. He raised 5 kids here, including my dad, and I spent every summer of my childhood running through that red barn and helping with the vegetable garden. The house smells like coffee and sawdust exactly the way I remember it. When the developers came sniffing around in 1989, Grandpa was smart about it. He sold them the development rights to build their fancy subdivision, but he kept our 2.3 acres. The contract was crystal clear. The Morrison family land stays Morrison family land, period. I'm 45, recently divorced, and frankly, moving back here was the best decision I'd made in years. My ex-wife had wanted me to sell this place, said it was holding me back from opportunities. Turns out the only thing holding me back was her constant need for bigger houses and fancier cars. The neighborhood that grew up around Grandpa's farm is, well, it's something else. 47 identical beige houses with identical green lawns, each one looking like it rolled off an assembly line. Not a blade of grass out of place, not a car parked on the street overnight, not a single sign of actual human life. And ruling over this beige kingdom, Karen Whitfield, HOA president for 8 long years. Karen's 52, drives a white BMW that she washes twice a week, and has the kind of smile that makes you check your pockets afterward. She moved here for property values and standards, which apparently means making everyone else as miserable as she is. The woman has called code enforcement on neighbors for leaving Christmas lights up past January 2nd. I'm not kidding. For the first few months after I moved back, we coexisted peacefully. I kept to myself, worked on the house, helped my elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen with her groceries. But I guess Karen was just waiting for the right moment to pounce. That moment came 3 weeks ago. I found a printed violation notice taped to my front door. Professional letterhead, official-looking seal, the whole 9 yards. The complaint? Unapproved vehicle repairs, excessive noise, non-conforming landscaping. $500 in fines, payable within 30 days. Now, maybe a small-town diesel mechanic, but I'm not stupid. I spent the next evening in the county recorder's office, going through every document related to this property. Guess what I found? Not a single signature from any Morrison family member on any HOA agreement, ever. We were grandfathered in, completely exempt. When I didn't pay Karen's made-up fine, she escalated, posted on the neighborhood Facebook group about how I was bringing down everyone's property values with my rural lifestyle choices. The comments were brutal. People calling me selfish, inconsiderate, a bad neighbor. These were folks I'd never even spoken to, forming opinions based on Karen's version of reality. That's when I decided to rebuild Grandpa's 1987 Chevy pickup. Call it a memorial project, call it therapy. Either way, I was going to bring that beautiful old truck back to life. 7 a.m. seemed like a perfectly reasonable time to start, well within city noise ordinances. The sound of Karen's slippers slapping against wet grass should have been my first warning, but honestly, I was focused on getting that carburetor cleaned, breathing in the familiar smell of diesel fuel and possibility. Officer Martinez, turns out we went to high school together, recognized me immediately. "Jake Morrison, haven't seen you since graduation. How's your grandpa?" "Passed away in April." I said, left me the farm. That's when Martinez pulled up the property records on his computer. His eyebrows shot up like they were spring-loaded. Ma'am, he said to Karen, this gentleman owns this property, has for decades. Karen's face went through several interesting color changes. That's impossible. This is an HOA community. He has to follow our rules. Martinez looked at me, then back at Karen. Actually, ma'am, according to these records, his property predates your HOA by about 30 years. The look on Karen's face? Pure, undiluted rage, and I knew right then that this was just the beginning. Karen didn't take that revelation well. Not well at all. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Karen's lost her mind. I shouldn't have been surprised. When someone's entire identity revolves around controlling other people, discovering you can't control someone tends to break their brain a little. The meeting was called for 7 p.m. at the community center, a beige building that matches all the beige houses, because apparently diversity is against HOA bylaws. I decided to attend, partly out of curiosity and partly because I figured Karen would be talking about me anyway. The smell of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner hit me the moment I walked in. Karen stood at the front of the room behind a folding table wearing a navy blazer that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation about me. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, clicking to a slide titled "Protecting Our Community Standards," "we face an unprecedented threat to our property values." Up on the screen, photos of my property, my vegetable garden labeled unapproved agricultural activity, my work truck labeled commercial vehicle violation, the barn my grandfather built in 1963 labeled non-conforming structure. "This individual," she said, pointing at me like I was some kind of exotic disease, "refuses to comply with basic community standards. His property maintenance threatens everything we've worked to build here." I raised my hand. "Karen, can I ask a question?" Her eye actually twitched. "This is not a discussion period." "Right, but you're showing pictures of my property without permission, making claims about violations that don't apply to me, and calling me this individual when I'm sitting right here. My name's Jake, by the way." A few neighbors chuckled. Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. She clicked to the next slide. "Legal action required." The board, 4 people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, voted 4-1 to pursue all available legal remedies. Mrs. Chen was the lone dissenter, bless her heart. After the meeting, I drove straight to the county recorder's office. Tommy Rodriguez, the night clerk, was an old buddy from high school who owed me a favor from when I'd fixed his motorcycle for free. "Jake, what brings you here after hours?" "You need to understand something about property records, Tommy. This HOA situation is getting weird." Tommy pulled up the subdivision plat map from 1995 on his computer. There it was, clear as day, Parcel A, not subject to covenants. My 2.3 acres specifically excluded from all HOA authority. But here's where it got interesting. Tommy showed me the HOA's original incorporation documents from 1995. According to their own founding paperwork, they had no authority over my land. Karen either never bothered checking the legal documents, or she'd been ignoring them for years. "Tommy," I said, studying the screen, "if they've been operating under false pretenses, what does that mean for their other activities?" "Well," he said, scrolling through more records, "if they've been collecting fees or making decisions about property they don't actually control." That's when we found it. The HOA's 2019 annual report listed total acreage under their management as 17.3 acres. But according to the legal documents, they only had authority over 15 acres. They'd been including my property in their calculations, which meant they'd been charging residents maintenance fees for land they had no right to manage. The next morning brought a new escalation. Karen had organized a door-to-door petition campaign, complete with clipboard and official-looking badges. The petition demanded my removal as a non-compliant resident. I watched from my kitchen window as she worked the street, hitting every house with the efficiency of a seasoned politician. The crunch of autumn leaves under her sensible shoes created a steady rhythm as she marched from door to door. By afternoon, anonymous letters started appearing in mailboxes around the neighborhood. Not just mine, everyone's. "Sell and leave or we'll make you," written in block letters on generic copy paper. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door that evening, holding one of the letters. Jake, this is getting dangerous. Karen's telling people you're planning to turn this into some kind of auto repair business. That's ridiculous, Mrs. Chen. I fix engines in my barn sometimes, but it's not a business. I know that. You fixed my lawnmower last month and wouldn't take a penny for it, but Karen's got some folks convinced you're going to have 18-wheelers rolling through here at all hours. That's when I decided to get serious about documentation. I installed security cameras around the property perimeter and started photographing the exact boundaries using Grandpa's original survey markers. The metallic click of the camera shutter became my evening soundtrack. But the real revelation came when I dug deeper into the HOA's financial records. Public documents showed something disturbing. They'd been paying property taxes on 17.3 acres, not 15. They'd been including my land in their tax assessments and passing those costs on to residents. Karen wasn't just power hungry, she might be stealing money. Karen's next move was pure desperation disguised as authority. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of official vehicles in my driveway. Through the window, I could see a city code enforcement truck and Karen's white BMW parked side by side like some kind of bureaucratic tag team. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with Karen's overpowering perfume as I opened the front door. Standing there was Dave Patterson, city inspector, looking about as thrilled as a man getting a root canal. Behind him, Karen hovered like a vulture in a pantsuit. Mr. Morrison, I'm here about complaints regarding unpermitted structures and possible septic violations. I invited them in for coffee, but Karen jumped in immediately. That barn is clearly unpermitted, and I have reason to believe he's running an illegal auto repair business. Dave looked at his clipboard, then at Karen, then back at me. Sir, do you have permits for that barn? From 1963, I said, pulling out Grandpa's old folder. Would you like to see them? The look on Karen's face was priceless, like someone had just told her Santa Claus was filing for bankruptcy. Dave examined the yellow documents with the care of an archaeologist. These are grandfathered permits. Structure predates current zoning by about 40 years. He turned to Karen. Ma'am, this is all perfectly legal. But Karen wasn't done. What about the septic system? I'm sure it's not up to code. 20 minutes later, after Dave had poked around my perfectly functional septic system, he turned to Karen with barely concealed irritation. Ma'am, everything here is up to code. Someone gave me false information. After they left, I called Sarah Kim, the property attorney Mrs. Chin had recommended. Sarah's office smelled like leather-bound law books and determination, which I found oddly comforting. Jake, she said after reviewing my documents, you're not just exempt from HOA authority. They may have been committing insurance fraud. Here's what Sarah discovered. The HOA had been including my property in their insurance coverage and collecting premiums from residents for land they had no legal right to represent. Legal knowledge nugget. When HOAs include non-member property in their insurance calculations, they're essentially collecting money under false pretenses. Takeaway: if your property predates the restrictions, you're usually protected and they can't charge you for coverage you never agreed to. While I was learning about my legal protections, Karen was escalating her public relations war. She'd created a fake Nextdoor account, Concerned Meadowbrook Resident 47, to post daily complaints about my declining property maintenance and suspicious vehicle activity. The woman had also organized what she called an emergency community meeting at the local library. She'd even contacted Channel 7 News, claiming there was a property value crisis threatening the entire neighborhood. I decided to attend her little show. The library meeting room buzzed with fluorescent lights and nervous energy. About 30 residents had shown up, along with Maria Santos from Channel 7. Karen stood at the front with another PowerPoint presentation, this one titled, Protecting Our Investment. The smell of industrial coffee mixed with the tension in the air as Karen clicked through slides of misleading photos. My work truck became evidence of commercial activity. My vegetable garden became agricultural zoning violations. Then she showed a photo of my barn with the caption, Potential Environmental Hazard. That's when I stood up. Karen, can I ask where you got that photo? She fumbled with her presentation remote. These are publicly visible structures. Right, but that photo was taken from inside my barn, which means you were trespassing on my property to get it. The room went dead quiet. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop humming. I pulled out my folder of county documents. Since we're all here, maybe everyone should know the actual legal situation. Maria Santos perked up immediately, sensing a bigger story. I explained the property boundaries, the grandfathered rights, the HOA's lack of authority over my land. I showed them the incorporation documents that specifically excluded my property. I kept my voice calm and factual, while Karen's face went through several interesting color changes. Furthermore, I continued, I've discovered that the HOA has been charging all of you maintenance fees for my property, which they have no right to manage. That's when the real fireworks started. Residents began asking pointed questions about where their HOA fees were actually going. Karen stammered through non-answers, while Maria Santos scribbled notes furiously. 3 residents approached me after the meeting, apologizing for signing Karen's petition. "We had no idea about the legal situation," said Bob Henderson from Maple Street. "Karen made it sound like you were some kind of squatter." But the most interesting conversation was with Maria Santos. "Jake, I think there's a much bigger story here. Would you be willing to go on the record about HOA overreach?" As I drove home, I noticed Karen's BMW following me at a distance. When I pulled into my driveway, she drove past slowly, talking animatedly on her phone. The next morning brought a new escalation, a formal police report claiming I had threatened her during the library meeting. Karen was getting desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. Karen's threat complaint landed on Detective Williams' desk on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, he was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and looking mildly amused. "Jake, I've reviewed the library security footage. Unless threatening behavior now includes calmly reading legal documents aloud, I think Miss Whitfield might be wasting my time." Detective Williams was a methodical man who smelled faintly of cigarettes and skepticism. He'd been dealing with neighborhood disputes for 15 years, and something about Karen's story wasn't adding up. "She claims you've been harassing her, following her around, making threatening phone calls. But her phone records don't show any calls from your number, and your work schedule puts you at the garage during most of the alleged incidents." That's when things got interesting. While Detective Williams was debunking Karen's claims, my security cameras were capturing something much more damning. Karen herself, creeping around my property at 2 a.m. The footage was crystal clear. Tuesday night, Karen's white BMW parked 3 houses down, her figure, clearly recognizable even in dark clothing, slipping between the shadows to photograph my vehicles and peer into barn windows. The crunch of gravel under her feet was audible on the audio feed. "Detective," I said, showing him the footage on my laptop, "I think Karen's projecting. She's accusing me of stalking behavior while literally stalking me." Williams leaned back in his chair, studying the screen. "Jake, this is harassment and trespassing. Want to press charges?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Sarah Kim, my attorney, with news that changed everything. "Jake, you need to sit down. The private investigator Karen hired just called me." Apparently, Karen had spent $3,000 hiring Rick Donovan, a PI from Columbus, to find dirt on me. Rick had spent 2 weeks investigating my background, my finances, my work history, my divorce records. He'd even contacted my ex-wife, hoping she'd provide ammunition for character assassination. But here's the beautiful irony. Rick's investigation had turned up absolutely nothing questionable about me. Clean driving record, no criminal history, excellent work reputation, divorce settled amicably, without any accusations of wrongdoing. What Rick did find was information about Karen. "Jake," Sarah continued, "Mr. Donovan discovered that Karen's real estate license has 3 pending ethics violations. She's been using her HOA position to steer business to herself, creating conflicts of interest. And get this, she's been using HOA funds for personal expenses." The smell of revelation hung in the air like burned coffee. Rick Donovan, it turned out, had a conscience. When he realized he'd been hired to harass an innocent man while the real criminal was signing his checks, he decided to cooperate with us instead. Legal knowledge nugget. Private investigators who discover their clients are committing crimes have professional obligations to protect innocent targets. Takeaway, when someone hires a PI to investigate you and they find nothing, that investigator might become your strongest ally. Meanwhile, Karen's public campaign was backfiring spectacularly. Maria Santos from Channel 7 had started her own investigation into HOA financial practices. She'd discovered that several other residents had received letters from collection agencies for unpaid assessments, fees that weren't properly authorized according to the HOA's own bylaws. The community was beginning to fracture. Mrs. Chen organized a counter-petition supporting my property rights, while the neighborhood Facebook group split into warring factions. Pro-Karen residents posted about property values and community standards. Pro-Jake residents shared stories about Karen's authoritarian behavior and questionable financial decisions. Then Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Saturday afternoon, I was at Henderson's Hardware picking up supplies for winterizing the barn. The store smelled of sawdust and motor oil, familiar and comforting. I was comparing prices on weather stripping when Karen burst through the front door like a woman possessed. "There he is," she screamed, pointing at me with a trembling finger, "the man who's destroying our entire neighborhood." The other customers, maybe 8 people total, turned to stare. Bill Henderson, the store owner, looked up from his register with the expression of a man who'd seen too much drama for one lifetime. Karen launched into a tirade about property values, community standards, and my apparent plan to turn the neighborhood into a junkyard. Her voice grew higher and more shrill with each accusation. Spit flew from her lips as she gestured wildly. "He threatened me. He's harassing me. He's planning to open some kind of truck stop right in our backyard." I stood there, quietly, holding my weather stripping, letting her dig her own grave with words. "Ma'am," Bill Henderson said finally, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice or leave the store." "Don't you understand?" Karen shrieked. "This man is a criminal, a threat to decent people." That's when young Ashley Morrison, no relation unfortunately, started recording with her smartphone. The video of Karen's complete meltdown would be viewed 47,000 times by Monday morning. But the best part? Sarah Kim had just discovered something in the county tax records that would blow this whole case wide open. The HOA hadn't just been mismanaging money, they'd been operating illegally for 3 years. Sarah Kim called me at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning, and the excitement in her voice cut through my coffee-induced fog like a chainsaw through butter. "Jake, you need to get down to my office immediately. What my paralegal found in the courthouse basement is going to change everything." An hour later, I was sitting across from Sarah's desk, staring at a yellowed document that looked like it had survived the Civil War. The paper crackled when she unfolded it, releasing the musty smell of decades-old bureaucracy. "This is your grandfather's original 1989 land purchase agreement," Sarah said, pointing to a clause buried in legal jargon. "Look at paragraph 7. I squinted at the faded typewriter text. "Right of first refusal on surrounding development. Mineral rights and easements retained. Reversion clause if homeowners association becomes defunct or non-compliant." "Jake," Sarah said, her eyes practically glowing, "if the HOA loses its legal standing, you don't just get to ignore their rules, you potentially inherit control over the entire 15-acre subdivision." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. "Come again." "Your grandfather was smarter than anyone realized. This clause means that if the HOA ever becomes legally non-existent, all the development rights revert back to the Morrison family. You could literally own the whole neighborhood." While I was processing that bombshell, Sarah dropped another one. The forensic accountant finished reviewing the HOA's books. Karen didn't just embezzle money, she embezzled a lot of money. $127,000 over 4 years. The numbers were staggering. Karen had created a fake company called Meadowbrook Maintenance, LLC, and been billing the HOA for services that never existed. Lawn care that wasn't performed, repairs that were never made, supplies that were never delivered. The money went straight into her personal accounts. Legal knowledge nugget. Creating shell companies to steal from organizations you control is aggravated theft, not simple embezzlement. Takeaway: always check original property deeds. They might contain valuable rights you inherited without knowing it. But here's where it got truly devastating for Karen. The HOA itself had lost its legal standing. "They haven't filed their annual corporate paperwork with the state since 2022, Sarah explained. "Technically, the HOA doesn't exist anymore. Every decision Karen's made, every fee she's collected, every threat she's issued, it's all been without legal authority." The HOA had been a ghost organization for 3 years, collecting money and making rules with no more legal standing than my neighborhood book club. So when Karen threatened to sue me, she was bluffing with a hand that didn't exist, Sarah finished. A non-existent organization can't file lawsuits. The implications hit me like a freight train. Not only was I exempt from HOA rules, but those rules technically didn't exist anymore anyway. Karen had been running an elaborate con game, collecting fees and wielding authority she hadn't legally possessed since 2022. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Karen's calling, emergency board meeting tonight. Says she has new legal strategy to handle Jake's situation. Something's wrong. She looks panicked. Sarah, I said, what happens if word gets out that the HOA has been operating illegally for 3 years? Well, every fee collected since 2022 was obtained under false pretenses. Residents could file for full refunds. There could be criminal charges for theft and fraud, and if someone wanted to press their legal advantage, she gestured at Grandpa's document, you could force the entire neighborhood to acknowledge that you own their development rights. Every resident would technically need your permission to maintain their properties according to the original 1989 agreement. The irony was delicious. Karen had spent months trying to control me, not realizing that I might actually have the legal right to control everyone else. But with great power comes great responsibility, and I was starting to form a plan that would give Karen exactly what she deserved, while protecting the innocent neighbors who'd been caught in her web of lies. Sarah, I said, I think it's time Karen learned what real legal authority looks like. That evening, my kitchen table became mission control for the most satisfying legal takedown in Meadowbrook Estates history. The oak's surface groaned under the weight of legal documents, financial records, and enough evidence to bury Karen's schemes deeper than my grandfather's old well. Sarah Kim sat across from me, her laptop glowing in the lamplight. Mrs. Chen occupied the chair to my right, sipping jasmine tea and offering the kind of strategic wisdom that comes from surviving 83 years of neighborhood politics. Maria Santos from Channel 7 had her recording equipment spread across one end of the table, while Officer Martinez, officially off duty but personally invested, reviewed the criminal evidence we'd assembled. The smell of coffee mixed with Mrs. Chen's tea, creating an oddly comforting atmosphere for planning someone's professional destruction. All right, Sarah said, pulling up her legal strategy document. We're going to hit Karen with a 3-pronged attack. Criminal charges, civil recovery, and complete HOA dissolution. She clicked to her first slide. Criminal side. I've already filed complaints with the State Attorney General for corporate fraud and elder abuse. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is interested because Karen's shell company operated across state lines when she used HOA funds for that Florida vacation. Maria Santos looked up from her notes. What about the media angle? That's where you come in, Sarah continued. We need this story to go public in a way that protects the innocent residents while exposing Karen's crimes. Can Channel 7 handle a week-long investigative series? Maria grinned. HOA corruption stories get massive ratings. My news director will love this. Officer Martinez leaned forward. From a law enforcement perspective, we need to coordinate timing. If Karen realizes how deep this investigation goes, she might try to flee or destroy evidence. Legal knowledge nugget. Triple damages are available in fraud cases where the defendant acted with deliberate malice against vulnerable victims like elderly residents. Takeaway. Recording HOA meetings and keeping financial records protects your entire community from predatory board members. Mrs. Chen set down her teacup with a delicate clink. Jake, what about the other residents? Many of them believed Karen's lies about you. They're victims too. That's where our community outreach plan came in. Mrs. Chen would lead a door-to-door education campaign, explaining residents' rights and teaching them how to check their HOA's legal status with the state corporate registry. We distribute copies of the original property deeds and show people exactly what they'd been paying for versus what they'd actually received. The goal, I explained, is to protect everyone from future predatory schemes while making sure Karen faces consequences for what she's done. Sarah pulled up financial documents on her laptop. The forensic accountant identified $340,000 0 cents in recoverable assets. Karen's Florida condo, the BMW lease, even her jewelry collection purchased with HOA funds. We can get most of the stolen money back. But here's where our plan got really clever. Instead of just exposing Karen's crimes, we're going to use her own tactics against her. Karen's been operating under the assumption that she has legal authority, Sarah explained. So we're going to schedule an official HOA board meeting, completely legal and proper, where she'll be required to account for her financial management. The beauty of it was that Karen would have to attend or forfeit any remaining authority. We'd hold the meeting at the county courthouse, invite all residents, welcome media coverage, and have a court reporter document everything for the official record. She won't know about the criminal investigation, Officer Martinez added. As far as Karen's concerned, this is just another neighborhood dispute she can bully her way through. Maria Santos was practically bouncing in her chair. This is going to be incredible television. David versus Goliath, except David has a law degree and Goliath's been embezzling money. The psychological aspect was crucial too. For months, Karen had been using fear and intimidation to control the neighborhood. Our response would be calm, factual, and completely transparent. Every document would be available for public review. Every resident would understand their rights. We're not trying to destroy Karen out of revenge, I said, looking around the table at my unlikely allies. We're protecting this community from future abuse. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. Good neighbors make good neighborhoods, not good rules. Our timeline was tight but manageable. Sarah would file the remaining legal paperwork by Friday. Maria would begin her investigative series the following Monday. The official HOA meeting was scheduled for the next Thursday evening. We also had contingency plans. If Karen tried to flee, Officer Martinez had connections with law enforcement in Florida. If she attempted to destroy evidence, we'd already secured copies of everything through legal discovery. If she tried to intimidate witnesses, we had her harassment recorded on multiple security cameras. The sweet smell of justice mixed with the evening air drifting through my kitchen windows. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful under the streetlights. Soon it would actually be peaceful. No more HOA terror, no more fraudulent fees, no more Karen. Gentlemen and ladies, I said, raising my coffee mug, let's go catch ourselves a criminal. Karen must have sensed the walls closing in, because her next move was pure scorched earth desperation. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of diesel engines and Spanish voices outside my bedroom window. I stumbled to the window and couldn't believe what I saw. A crew of landscapers systematically destroying my vegetable garden. In the glare of portable floodlights, they were ripping up my grandfather's heirloom tomato plants, trampling the herb garden, and yanking fruit trees out by their roots. And there was Karen, standing beside a rented pickup truck, directing the destruction like some kind of suburban war criminal. I grabbed my phone and hit record while dialing 91011. The security cameras were capturing everything, but I wanted backup footage. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the scent of crushed basil and destroyed dreams. Ma'am, you need to stop this immediately, I called out, stepping onto my porch in pajamas and work boots. Karen turned toward me with wild eyes. I have HOA authority to remove non-compliant plantings? At 3 a.m, with a crew you hired? One of the landscapers looked confused. Lady, you said this was your property. It is. I'm the HOA president. The poor guy looked between Karen and me, clearly realizing he'd been dragged into something illegal. Smart man dropped his shovel and walked back to his truck. Detective Williams arrived within 10 minutes, followed by Officer Martinez and another patrol car. The flashing lights turned my front yard into a crime scene light show. Mrs. Whitfield, Detective Williams said, surveying the destruction, you're under arrest for criminal mischief and trespassing. But Karen wasn't done yet. While being handcuffed, she screamed about her rights as an HOA board member and how I was destroying the neighborhood. The landscaping crew, meanwhile, was providing statements about how Karen had hired them to remove unauthorized plantings from HOA property. $3,000 worth of damage to plants that had been growing on my family's land since before Karen was born. The next morning brought an even more desperate escalation. Karen, released on bail, had apparently decided that if she couldn't destroy my property legally, she'd try sabotage instead. I discovered the diesel fuel leak when I went to start my work truck. Someone had punctured the fuel tank overnight, and the sweet smell of diesel was spreading across my gravel driveway like a toxic rainbow. Security cameras showed a figure in dark clothing around 2 a.m., but they'd been careful to avoid facial identification. Sarah Kim was furious when I called her. Jake, this is escalating beyond neighborhood disputes. Karen's looking at felony charges now. But the real revelation came when Rick Donovan, the private investigator, called with an update on his financial investigation. Jake, Karen's been busier than we thought. I found 12 other neighborhoods where she pulled similar schemes over the past 5 years. Real estate license violations in 3 counties. She's been targeting elderly residents specifically. using her HOA positions to create artificial property emergencies that require her real estate services. The pattern was sickening. Karen would join an HOA board, manufacture crises about property values, pressure elderly residents to sell quickly, then pocket the commissions while collecting kickbacks from developers. She'd stolen an estimated $400,000, 0 cents, across multiple communities. The FBI's building a federal case for interstate fraud, Rick continued. Your neighborhood was just her latest hunting ground. Meanwhile, Karen's personal life was imploding as spectacularly as her criminal enterprise. Her husband Bob filed for divorce after discovering the financial crimes, taking their 2 kids and moving in with his sister. Karen's adult son Derek flew in from California to handle the situation, which apparently meant threatening me outside the grocery store. My mom's a good person, Derek shouted, jabbing his finger toward my chest. You're destroying her life with these lies. I stepped back calmly. Derek, your mom embezzled over $100,000 from this neighborhood alone. That's not a lie. That's mathematics. I don't care what your fake documents say, she's my mother. That's when Officer Martinez happened to walk out of the grocery store. Derek's voice had been loud enough to hear from the parking lot, and making threats in public tends to attract police attention. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from Mr. Morrison, Martinez said, his hand resting casually on his radio. Derek made the mistake of escalating further. This whole town is corrupt. You're all protecting this criminal. 3 minutes later, Derek was in handcuffs for menacing and disorderly conduct. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's own son had just been arrested while defending her honor. That evening, Maria Santos called with news that made my day complete. Jake, Karen tried to contact my news director to kill the investigative series. She offered him a $5,000 bribe to focus on more important stories. Karen had just added attempted bribery of a journalist to her growing list of crimes. The woman was digging her own grave with a steam shovel. Maria, I said, I think we're ready for the final confrontation. The courthouse meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, but Karen arrived at 6:30 with the determination of a general preparing for her last battle. I watched from my truck as she lugged boxes of evidence up the courthouse steps, her heels clicking against concrete like a countdown timer to her own destruction. She'd brought backup too. Her husband, Bob, despite filing for divorce, stood beside her looking like a man attending his own funeral. Derek, fresh out of jail on bail, hovered near the courthouse entrance, making aggressive gestures at anyone who looked sympathetic to me. The meeting room smelled like industrial disinfectant and nervous sweat when I walked in with Sarah Kim and Mrs. Chen. Karen had set up a laptop and projector at the front, surrounded by banker's boxes labeled "Evidence of Harassment" in her precise handwriting. 47 residents had shown up, the largest HOA meeting in the neighborhood's history. Maria Santos and her Channel 7 crew occupied the back corner, cameras rolling. County Prosecutor Janet Stevens sat in the front row with a briefcase that probably contained Karen's future. FBI agent Patricia Wong observed from the side wall, taking notes. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a rusty butter knife. Karen called the meeting to order with trembling hands, trying to project the authority she'd wielded for 8 years. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to address the ongoing harassment campaign against your elected HOA leadership. She clicked to her first PowerPoint slide, a photo of my property taken from a deceptive angle that made my vegetable garden look like an abandoned lot. This individual has systematically violated every community standard we've worked to maintain. I sat quietly in the front row, hands folded, letting her dig the hole deeper. He's threatened board members, destroyed community harmony, and engaged in illegal business activities on residential property. Her voice grew shriller with each accusation. Tonight we're voting to take legal action for his immediate removal. That's when Sarah Kim stood up. Mrs. Whitfield, may I present some relevant financial documents to the community? Karen's face went pale. This is not a discussion period. Actually, said Prosecutor Janet Stevens, as a matter of public interest, I think the community should see these records. Sarah connected her laptop to the projector. Up on the screen, HOA bank statements showing Karen's unauthorized transfers, fake invoices for services never rendered, purchase records for the Florida condo bought with community funds. The room erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Mrs. Henderson from Maple Street shouted, "You bought a vacation home with our money?" Karen frantically clicked her remote, trying to regain control of the presentation. "These are fabricated documents. This man has been harassing me for months." "Mrs. Whitfield," Sarah said calmly, "these records come directly from your bank. Would you like to explain this $43,000 0 cents transfer to Meadowbrook Maintenance, LLC, a company that doesn't exist?" That's when Karen completely lost it. "Lies!" she screamed, lunging toward the projector. "All of you are conspiring against me. This is my neighborhood. I built this community." Bob Whitfield stood up and walked out of the room. Their marriage was officially over in front of 47 witnesses and a TV news crew. Derek rushed toward the front of the room. "Don't you dare attack my mother." Courthouse security stepped in before Derek could reach Sarah, but the damage was done. Karen's family was imploding in real time, on camera, in front of the entire community. "Mrs. Whitfield," Prosecutor Stevens said, standing up with her briefcase, "I have here warrants for your arrest on charges of aggravated theft, elder abuse, and interstate fraud." The room went dead silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the whir of TV cameras. Maria Santos revealed the final bombshell. "Ladies and gentlemen, Channel 7's investigation has discovered that Miss Whitfield operated similar schemes in 12 other communities across 3 states. The FBI estimates total theft at over $400,000, 0 cents. Karen sank into her chair like a deflating balloon. "This can't be happening. I'm the president. I'm in charge here." That's when I finally stood up. "Karen, you were never in charge of me, and according to state corporate records, you haven't been legally in charge of this HOA since 2022. I turned to address the room. "The organization that's been collecting your fees and making your rules lost its legal standing 3 years ago. Every fee you've paid since then was obtained under false pretenses." The community erupted in angry voices demanding refunds, explanations, justice. Karen sat at the front table, staring at her laptop screen like it might provide an escape route. Detective Williams appeared at the back of the room with handcuffs. "Karen Whitfield, you're under arrest for aggravated theft, corporate fraud, and elder abuse." As Karen was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Jake Morrison." I stood up calmly and delivered the line I'd been saving for months. "Actually, Karen, it is. You forgot one important detail when you decided to mess with me. I held up Grandpa's original land deed. I don't just live here, I own here." The look on her face was worth every sleepless night she'd caused me. The story exploded across social media faster than spilled diesel fuel ignites. Within 24 hours, Channel 7's courthouse footage had racked up 2.3 million views. Karen's mugshot became an instant internet meme, peak Karen moment, trending alongside AOC corruption and justice served. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, but the real satisfaction came from watching the dominoes fall exactly as we'd planned. Karen's arraignment drew a crowd of over 200 people, victims from 12 different neighborhoods across 3 states. The courthouse steps looked like a bizarre homeowners association convention, except everyone was there to watch their former tormentor face justice. Judge Patricia Hoffman set bail at $500,000. Karen, sitting in an orange jumpsuit that clashed terribly with her usual color-coordinated outfits, couldn't make the payment. All her assets had been frozen pending asset forfeiture proceedings. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Janet Stevens announced, "the state is filing federal charges for wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering conspiracy. We're seeking 15 to 20 years due to the scope of victimization and deliberate targeting of elderly residents." Derek had already pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for cooperating against his mother. The kid finally realized that defending Karen's honor wasn't worth destroying his own life. But the real fireworks happened outside the courthouse. Maria Santos had coordinated with investigative teams from 3 major networks. ABC, NBC, and CNN all wanted the story of the HOA president who forgot her place and lost everything. The courthouse steps turned into a media circus that would have made Karen proud under different circumstances. "Jake Morrison," said Rebecca Chin from ABC News, "you've become the face of HOA reform nationwide. How does it feel to know your story is inspiring legislation in 6 states? I stood on those courthouse steps, flanked by Sarah Kim and Mrs. Chen, looking out at a crowd of reporters and grateful neighbors. The autumn air smelled like justice and possibility. "This was never about revenge," I said, speaking directly into the cameras. This was about protecting a community from someone who forgot that power comes with responsibility, not just privilege. The crowd erupted in applause. Someone in the back shouted, "Tell him about the land rights!" I held up Grandpa's original deed, the document that had started this whole journey. My grandfather was a wise man. When he sold development rights in 1989, he included a clause protecting the community from exactly this kind of corruption. Sometimes the law protects good people, but only if they're brave enough to stand up and use it. Legal knowledge nugget. Sunshine laws require HOA financial transparency, and whistleblower protection laws prevent retaliation against residents who report fraud. Takeaway, recording meetings and demanding open records are your best defense against corruption, and it's completely legal. Maria Santos stepped forward with her microphone. What's your message to other communities dealing with HOA abuse? Check your HOA's legal status with the state corporate registry. Demand to see financial records. Record every meeting. And remember, bullies only have the power you give them. That's when Karen appeared for her perp walk. Detective Williams escorted her through the crowd in handcuffs, past dozens of cameras and hundreds of her former victims. She kept her head down, but I could see her scanning the crowd for supporters. There weren't any. One elderly man from the Cherry Grove neighborhood called out, "Karen! You remember me? You stole my grandson's college fund." Another voice, "She took our roof repair money for her vacation." The crowd's anger was palpable, but it was controlled. These weren't people seeking revenge. They were citizens watching justice finally being served. As Karen reached the transport vehicle, she looked back at me one final time. The hatred in her eyes had been replaced by something worse. The realization that she'd destroyed everything for nothing. "Jake Morrison," she called out, her voice barely audible over the crowd. "You think you've won, but you've destroyed more than just me." I walked closer so she could hear my response clearly. "Karen, I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped letting you destroy other people." The transport doors closed with a metallic clang that sounded like the end of an era. Reporter after reporter wanted quotes, but the most important conversation happened with Mrs. Chen as we walked back to my truck. "Jake," she said, taking my arm with her weathered hand, "your grandfather would be proud. You used his gift not just to protect yourself, but to protect all of us." The drive home took us through the neighborhood Karen had terrorized for 8 years. Kids were playing in yards without fear of violation notices. Neighbors were talking over fence lines without worrying about being reported. For sale signs that had appeared during the crisis were coming down as families decided to stay. The mic drop moment, sometimes standing up to one bully, protects thousands of future victims. As we pulled into my driveway, I could see lights on in houses throughout Meadowbrook Estates. Not the nervous lights of people afraid of their HOA president, but the warm lights of a community finally free to be itself. Karen's reign of terror was over. Now the real work could begin. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my front porch watching the best sunset Meadowbrook Estates has seen in years. The smell of fresh bread drifts from Mrs. Chen's kitchen, mixing with the scent of tomatoes ripening in our community garden. Life has a way of healing itself when you remove the poison. Grandpa's 1987 Chevy purrs in the driveway, fully restored and running better than the day it rolled off the assembly line. I drive it to work every morning, windows down, radio playing his favorite country songs. Sometimes I swear I can feel him riding shotgun, proud of how his grandson finally learned to fight for what matters. The neighborhood association we formed to replace Karen's HOA operates on a simple principle. Voluntary cooperation beats mandatory compliance every single time. Property values have actually increased 12% since we dissolved the authoritarian structure. Turns out people pay more to live somewhere they feel free. My small engine repair business has taken off beyond anything I imagined. Word spread that the guy who took down the corrupt HOA also fixes lawnmowers, chainsaws, and generators, with honest prices and reliable work. I've hired 2 part-time employees, including Bob Henderson's son Tommy, who needed a job after graduating trade school. The Red Barn has become the heart of our community. Monthly potluck dinners bring neighbors together to share food, stories, and the kind of genuine friendship that HOA rules could never manufacture. Last month, we hosted 83 people for Mrs. Chen's 84th birthday party. The sound of laughter echoing off those old wooden beams would have made Grandpa smile. Sarah Kim and I got married in that same barn on a crisp October morning exactly 1 year after Karen's arrest. Mrs. Chen officiated. She'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, cackling with delight as she pronounced us husband and wife under the authority of love, not lawyers. Karen's serving her 12-year federal sentence at a minimum security facility in West Virginia. Her cellmate, ironically, is another HOA embezzler from Nevada who ran a similar scam. Derek visits occasionally, but their relationship remains strained. Some bridges burn too completely to rebuild. The ripple effects of our story continue spreading. The Ohio legislature passed the HOA Transparency Act, requiring annual independent audits and open financial records. 47 copycat investigations have been launched nationwide, recovering over $2,300,000, 0 cents in fraudulent fees, and sending 6 more predatory board members to prison. Testified before a congressional subcommittee on housing policy, sharing Grandpa's story and explaining how ordinary citizens can protect themselves from institutional bullying. Legal knowledge nugget. Sunshine laws requiring public meetings and open records are now standard in 34 states. Final takeaway. The best defense against corruption is an informed community that demands transparency. The community garden on my land produces enough vegetables to supply our local food bank year-round. We've established the Morrison Family Scholarship Fund, sending kids to trade schools and community colleges. This year's recipient, Maria Santos Jr., plans to study journalism, inspired by her mother's investigative work that helped bring Karen down. Mrs. Chen runs our Elder Protection Network, teaching seniors how to recognize financial scams and property rights abuse. She's prevented 3 attempted HOA fraud schemes in neighboring communities, earning the nickname the HOA Whisperer from grateful residents. The documentary Deed Restrictions and Democracy premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, winning the Audience Award for Best Investigative Film. Maria Santos used the prize money to start a nonprofit foundation supporting communities fighting HOA corruption. But the most satisfying moment came last week when I received a letter from a widow in Phoenix. Karen had targeted her neighborhood 3 years ago, pressuring elderly residents to sell their homes below market value. After seeing our story, the community investigated their own HOA, discovered similar fraud, and successfully prosecuted their board president. "Your grandfather's wisdom saved our neighborhood too," she wrote. "Thank you for showing us that one person with truth and law on their side can defeat any bully." As the sun sets behind the old barn, I can see children playing in yards throughout Meadowbrook Estates. No violation notices, no fear of arbitrary rules, no tyrannical HOA president watching from behind curtains. Just neighbors being neighbors. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments below. Let's help each other spot the warning signs and protect our communities from the next Karen. And subscribe for more stories about ordinary people fighting back against corruption and winning. Because sometimes the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same.